So I'm still on about Celts, and as is my way last week, I left you with the idea that Simon James had totally destroyed our idea of who the Celts were. That he told us the ancient peoples in Britain and Ireland can't be called Celts, they weren't Celts, it is totally a myth. Now, the disclaimer that has to go with that is Simon James is just one person. These are one person's ideas. That being said, people have gotten a lot of mileage out of Simon James's ideas. He's been fairly influential, he's often cited. He's pretty much got his converts. But I'm going to interject into the things I've been talking about and ask, what are the Celts supposed to be? I keep going on this question of who were the Celts, what were the Celts, sort of assuming that the Celts as an idea is kind of a given. I'm just wondering who it applies to. But what, as an idea, are Celts supposed to be? Well, you think about it for a second, it sounds fairly esoteric, but it's actually quite simple. They're a people. Now, is that really so simple? No, I don't think so. But I say it's simple in the way that we talk about peoples in this way a lot. We talk about Americans, or the British, or the Russians, the Chinese. This idea of peoples that we have is very, very present in our lives. It's something that we use offhand all the time. Now, that's good and that's bad. It's often more bad than it is good. But it's something that's there. It's something we do all the time, and it's kind of something we have to talk about because of it. What exactly do we mean when we say that something, or some group of peoples, is a people? Perhaps I should have said there when a group of persons is a people, to make it make more sense, but I think you get my idea here. What is a people is definitely the kind of question your professor asks in class and gets a resounding silence in response to. And in the grand scheme of things, I don't really think it is the kind of question that has an actual answer. I don't know, are we talking about communities, cultural groups, ancestral groups? At the same time, though, like I said, people talk about peoples. We must think it means something. That last idea I had about an ancestral group, that's sort of like a lineage or a biological population, that's kind of how people think of races. Are we talking about Celts as a race? Well, in the past I think people did, but I don't really think that's what we get at anymore. If we were to talk about Americans, that's sort of a nationality. I don't think the Celts exactly had a national government, so I don't think that's quite right either. What if I were to say I'm English? I mean, the English have a national government, so it is sort of a nationality, but I don't live there. If I were to say I'm English where I live, what I'd be saying is I'm ethnically English, I think. That's generally more what we mean when we say Celtic. We think of being Celtic as being ethnically Celtic, and being a Celt as being a form of ethnicity. So what's an ethnicity? It sort of just leads back to that question of what's a people, because we use the two pretty much interchangeably. Do I just have to have English ancestors to be ethnically English? One of my roommates has ancestors from the Czech Republic and ancestors from the Netherlands, even though family doesn't live there anymore. Does that make her Czech? Does it make her Dutch? Both? Neither, maybe? Well, there is a researcher named Sean Jones who quite literally wrote the book on the archaeology of ethnicity. And in her definition of what ethnicity is, she refers you to the idea of ethnic identity, which she says is that aspect of a person's self-conceptualization which results from identification with a broader group in opposition to others on the basis of perceived cultural differentiation and/or common descent. And if you keep reading her book, she'll tell you that she tries to develop a practice theory of ethnicity. Now, this might sound a bit esoteric to people who haven't heard this before, but bear with me, it will hopefully make sense. The basic idea is that ethnicity isn't something you just have, it's something that you do. Like I said, this might sound a bit esoteric, but take the example of myself. I think of myself as someone Irish. Now, that isn't something that I was just given, it wasn't handed down to me and I magically became Irish. I had to learn to be Irish, and I have to accept that about myself. And not only that, other people have to accept me as Irish. So when I interact with other people, I have to somehow communicate that to them, and they in turn have to look at what I've communicated about myself and say, yes, that is something that makes him Irish, and if that is other person is themselves Irish or thinks of themselves as Irish, they have to say, yes, this is something that I share with that person and that we can use the same identity for, being Irish. So if I meet someone from Ireland who's actually living there now, would they really think of me as Irish because I don't live there anymore? I can't really say. When I've been there, I generally have been received as sort of Irish, kind of. If I'm over here, and I'm talking to someone else who thinks of themselves as an Irish American over here, are we both going to say that we're Irish? Oh no. They might think I don't have enough Irish blood in me, or that I don't have enough experience being an Irish person to really call myself Irish. But this is all things that have to be negotiated and worked on. It's part of it being a practice rather than just a thing that's handed down. It isn't just something that happens because people are culturally different. Cultures are not things that are static and stuck in little bubbles. They're kind of fuzzy around the edges. They're things that we have to work on all the time. And that's why Jones says that it doesn't simply arise that we have ethnicities coming from cultural differentiation. We have to selectively choose to identify with those things. Now, if you got anything out of that bit of rambling, which hopefully you did, but if you got anything, it should maybe be that ethnicity sounds really hard to get at archaeologically. All that negotiating and identification doesn't really sound like the kind of thing that a bunch of holes in the ground and rocks is going to tell you about. Now, people like Jones have tried to work on getting at ethnicity through archaeology, but in practice it is really difficult. And a lot of the time, people have been kind of cavalier about doing it. There's this kind of concept called an archaeological culture. This is going to be one of the surprise moments. Archaeological cultures are really archaeological concept. The basic idea is that an archaeologist would look at a site, they would say, okay, these are the kinds of artifacts I've found here. Look at a second site, go, okay, these artifacts are similar from this site. Then the peoples living here are from the same archaeological culture. The idea being that they've lived in similar ways, they've produced and used the same kinds of stuff. So if an archaeologist was to look at my room and find that I have hoodies and blue jeans, and then they were to look at someone else's room where they also have hoodies and blue jeans, we would be said to belong to the same archaeological culture. What follows from that is that someone else, where they've got suit jackets and corduroy, they would be assigned to a different archaeological culture. Seems simple enough. It's kind of useful for archaeologists to kind of make sense of things, order them out. It's a useful analytical construct. The thing you have to ask is, how much is that actually telling you, though? I mean, you're sort of onto something. I don't own corduroy and I don't really plan on it, but does that define my ethnic identity? Well, maybe. If you think about it, clothes are something we do really use to identify ourselves, but not necessarily. And most of the time we don't have things like closed archaeological sites. More often, hard things preserve, like tools. Does the fork I eat with define my ethnic identity? Well, maybe. There are anthropologists who have worked with the San people in southern Africa. They use arrowheads carved in specific ways to signal to different people a person's ethnic identity. So in that case, maybe a tool does signal ethnic identity. But again, not necessarily. Quite often, though, in the past, people have used archaeological cultures to be a proxy for an ethnic identity. What that means is that they've looked at an archaeological culture and assumed an archaeological culture is the same as a culture, and that it's the same as an ethnic identity, and maybe even the same as a language. That these things are all somehow connected inherently. Hopefully it's pretty obvious that that's kind of ridiculous, but people did think that for a long time. Back in the days of cultural historical archaeology, that kind of thinking was all the rage. Is that what happened when people started thinking about the Celts? Did they look at an archaeological culture and go, aha, these people have the same stuff, they must somehow be the same? It's a very real possibility. Might be the source of this whole what in the world are the Celts fiasco that I've been kind of going on about for the last 3 weeks. For now, though, I actually want to kind of put that behind me for a bit, and I want to just live up to the fact that people talk about Celts. There is something that people call Celts, and there's archaeology that we associate with it, and I've been promising to talk about that archaeology and haven't been, so that is what I'm going to do next week. It's going to be great, And until then, goodbye, Internet.